Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today we're having a conversation with Jamie Jolly, one of the founders of Shadowborn Games and one of the designers of Oathsworn. A game that has been, for me, one of my most anticipated games of the year, if not my most. I had a chance about a year and a half ago to play on TTS and demo what they're doing with this project, and I have been and am still insanely excited about it. And I'm a backer. I ended up, after playing on TTS, post the campaign existing, because I just didn't have the funds at the time. I hopped into the Pledge Manager and have supported them for an all-in. So I am, let's say, bought into this campaign. Now, the conversation we're having today is in correspondence with an update they're putting out, well, right about now. You could go read it yourself if you want. I'll have a link down below as well so you can hear everything or read everything from their words. But over the course of the last 2 years, companies have been facing a shipping catastrophe, to say the least of it. And Oathsworn was one of the projects, and I'll let him talk about it a little bit more, but one of the very last projects to fund and close right before the pandemic hit. And so today we're going to be talking about that journey. We're going to be talking about what they've done to save themselves and backers something like $800,000 in extra shipping costs while still retaining an additional $1 million in unexpected price changing. We're going to talk about the steps they've taken to avoid having to ask backers for additional money, and we're going to talk about the reality of the fact now that they do have to go back. They will have to ask you for a few dollars to help get your pledge into your hands. It's not the 50 or 60 that they might have anticipated, but it is still something. And along with that, the reason why I'm willing to sit down and have this conversation is because they've been doing updates every month along the way, letting backers know the logistics, letting them see updates of miniatures and production models, and talking about this process. This isn't the first time they're having a conversation, and while this is the first time we're diving into this together, it's not the first time they've talked with it with their fans. So, the title of this video is something along the lines of 2 million lost in the shipping crisis. But that's not entirely the truth. The reality is, if it wasn't for the hard work in the last 8 months of this journey that we're going to talk to you about, that would have been the case. Or it would have been, I suppose, a company lost in the shipping crisis. So, Jamie, thank you for joining. Thanks for hopping into this call. This is not a fun or easy conversation to have. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Give me the core premise of what you all have been working on, and then tell me why we're having this conversation.
Hi, hi everyone. I'm Jamie Jolly. So I'm the designer of Oathsworn and the co-founder of Shadowborn Games. And for quite a lot of the last 6 months, I've basically been a global logistics manager trying to get this thing home and get it to you guys who backed the game. So, and yeah, I thought it might be of interest to some people to kind of know a little bit about what it's like to try and get a game to people, and then what sort of things are happening out there in the world, and just how strange and weird this world of kind of get things to be moved across the planet is at the moment, compared to how they were back in the day. It feels like a lifetime ago, 2 years ago, when we were actually 3 years ago, when we were kind of preparing for our Kickstarter and what the world looked like then and what it looks like now, and just really hoping to just help with a bit of transparency, and just let people know what we've been through, and this is the story of a lot of people, right? I've got a lot of friends who are in this situation, a lot of other publishers I know who are really struggling, and I thought, we've been in the middle of this, and we've been seeing some fairly big numbers and some very big swings, and because I've been able to be working on this pretty much all the time for the last 6 months, I've hopefully got a bit to say on it and help people understand a bit more.
Let's answer the first and most prominent question, the most important question that's there. The game is arriving to backers. Like, it's on the way, right? People are getting their game. Because the first thing people see when they're like, 2 million lost, they're like, oh no, it'll never show up.
Yeah. Well, with the first games left China today, actually today as a recording, so that's really exciting. This is that's a major thing. It's almost like, kind of gone into labour now, like the baby's coming. It's happening. So it's very exciting. So all the games are kind of hitting the waters in the next couple of weeks. And so it's actually at this time everything's kind of coming to a head as well for what we've been seeing. So so the game is definitely coming, and we can get it pretty much most of the way. We might need a little help getting it the last few miles, But yeah, it's definitely coming.
And I suppose the second question that I think is relevant for the people that are only going to watch 6 minutes of this, you are going back to ask backers for additional funds. Are you making a profit? Are you making, like, what is, and we'll get into the deeper conversation. We've got a long way to go to get there, but just right up front from the baseline, what are those additional funds actually helping with? Where are they going to? Why do you have to ask people for more money?
Yeah, so we've seen some pretty crazy times. I say the amount of money that we've been sort of staring down the barrel of is nearly $1 million now, that we have to find for shipping now,
of extra expenses.
Yeah, so so we originally estimated. So I'm a big spreadsheet guy. I've got a lot of spreadsheets. We spent a lot of time planning the Kickstarter, and so we were doing due diligence, going around our fulfillment companies and checking out what the prices would be for the game, and back in the day, back when we did this before COVID hit, we were looking at somewhere around 500,000, 570,000 total all in for the shipping, the freight, the delivery, and stuff like that. And we asked for less than that, but that was kind of how much we were looking at, and it was comfortable within the budget we had at the time. And then we said, like, we got a fairly scary number about 6 months ago, when we went for a requote. We'd had the green light from Panda had come back and said, right, we're ready to, manufacturing's finally kind of gearing up, we need to think about moving this. And so sort of around October time, we were getting this big requote, and it takes a long time. It takes several months to get a global requote. You're trying to move thousands of products across multiple regions, and it's a long way that a lot of this stuff's coming. So it takes a bit of time, but we got the quote back, and it was pretty brown trousers moment. We had a quote back for, like, it was between 1.8 and $2 million for the new number. So obviously that's an increase of
you raised how much on Kickstarter?
195, though obviously Kickstarter gets cut, so we saw a bit less than that.
So the on an insanely successful project, your new quote as of 6 months ago, that if it wasn't for all the work that you've done that we'll talk about, would have been close to the actual quote, was the cost of everything you'd raised on Kickstarter.
Yeah. If we'd spent almost nothing on the game at all, we might have just lost all of the money just on trying to ship nothing to the backers at that point. It was the entire budget of the Kickstarter.
Now, you and I have already talked, and so I kind of know the answer that I want to get to. We spent about an hour and a half this afternoon going through numbers and me kind of pushing your buttons and trying to figure out what was going to see if I could fairly do this video, fairly have a conversation, reassure backers, let people know, just update people, right? And so for those of you that are tuning in, what I know that maybe he'll be too shy to share until we get farther along in this video, but I think it's important to acknowledge, is he spent the last 5 years working on this project. And so far, he is putting his own funds in alongside yours that he's asking to make this shipping process work. You've been able to pay some of your employees or all of your employees over the course of the development, the artists, the designers, the graphics, but yourself and the other business owners haven't actually taken a cut from the company yet. You've actually reinvested your own money to get this into backers' hands.
Yeah, it's every publisher knows you've got to invest to be able to. You're trying to make dreams come true. It takes money to do that. So we've been investing our own money. We haven't taken any profits from that. So I've never received anything from the games design side of things. And much of the work I've done on the the campaigns and all that sort of thing. And even my partner Toby, with the sculpting and the management stuff he's been doing. Like, no, there hasn't been really anything coming back from that. I mean, what was one fantastic though is, like, if anyone backed the game, like, one of the really most fantastic things about the last couple of years is we have actually managed to pay, like, nearly 30 people wages for different lengths of time working on the project. And that's fantastic. So I really like to thank all the backers for doing that, because that's incredible. But no, we haven't, the core team hasn't really taken anything for that, because we need to see this over the line.
Not only that, but what you're asking for from backers comes after you've reinvested the money that you had left to make this happen. Am I correct on that? Like, is that the reality of the situation?
Yes. Yeah. So we're in a world where what we, as I said, with this, we had this $1.8 million like quote, and that was obviously quite scary. So what we did is we immediately sort of dropped any plans of future games, any plans of new stuff, and we were just right, we've got to get this thing made. So we actually started going really deep into how to solve the problem of that quote. It wasn't all doom and gloom, because we'd had like encouragement that this was Christmas, it was before Chinese New Year, these times were very expensive for shipping and things like that. But so we were expecting it to hopefully come down a little bit from there, but we also knew we definitely had to get involved. So we went and started doing all this dive into logistics at a very deep level. So we actually had people in the UK, US, and Germany basically going down on the ground, like going and visiting all these fulfillment companies. And we went around nearly 50 fulfillment companies, like trying to find the right partner for somebody who's going to do the job right, because it's your baby, and you want to make sure it's going to get to people okay. And you can't always tell anything from a website and all that sort of thing. But we went around to try and really had to try and find good solutions. We got into every area of the film, all the way from China, the port forwarding side of things, and then through to the ports, and then off to the sort of last leg stuff. And in the end, doing that, going very local, finding all kinds of companies that you never have heard of, just like that are doing these sort of good jobs in these areas. And we managed to bring that cost down. We even got to the point where we were even like finding and sourcing our own carton boxes, which is something, this is all like work, and it's just normal companies don't really want to do that. You want to get a fulfillment company and you want to pay them a number that then gets these things over the line. But we knew that wasn't going to be possible here, so we started doing all the the individual carton boxes and the fillers and all that kind of thing. Like, we're making sure we were getting exactly the right, the most economical kind of way of doing things on every level. So after about 6 months of doing that, we've managed to bring that number down to, it was actually with all the other stuff, it's down to about 750 thereabouts. We managed to get it down to, so it was saving over $1 million at that point in 6 months of work, bringing that down, and then the last 2 weeks kind of hit, and and we had a different change again. But
explain that. Give some context quickly on, because once you got to the point where, and we'll go through more of the logistics here in just a bit, but the front end of the conversation, once you got it down to 750, 800, you all were actually going to stomach that. It was more than you'd anticipated. It was more than you'd been ready for, but you were going to take the hit and deal with it. And then over the last 2 weeks, something has actually shifted in terms of needing to go back. You've had additional expenses.
Yeah, I mean, we were really excited. Like last month, I sent out an update to say, look, it might actually be possible. We're not going to ask for more shipping money. Even with
I went through and I read your last updates just to see if you'd genuinely been talking to people about this for the past 6 months every month, and you had been. There was a point where you were like, "Hey, things suck," and then the little messages, the little sentences started getting to like, "Hey, we may still have to ask you for stuff, but it's not going to be what we thought." And then literally a month ago, you were like, "It looks like we're good. It looks like we're fine."
Yeah, that was it. We were so hopeful. It was like, oh, mate, this is it. We were. It was almost like, it was just touching the line. It was a little bit here or there, but it was going to be okay. And then we were into, and this is something I thought might be interesting for people to hear, is right. The issue that's really hit us now, it isn't so much. I don't know, it's not so much a direct implication of COVID or a war, though it is kind of. There's areas to it, but we had situations where we obviously were trying to be very diligent and very careful about which port forwards was used. So we'd done serious quoting with 7 port forwarders, 7 different options, and then we'd really dug down.
Explain what a port forwarder is, just so we have context.
Yeah, so basically, once your game's ready at the factory, you need to get it from the factory to your hubs, your warehouses in different regions around. So we have like Canada, Australia, UK, Germany, and the US. And to get them there, you need to stick them in container ships and send them to there. And so the port forwarder is the company responsible for picking up basically providing the container, picking it up from the factory. They fill it up and goes off onto the ship, gets to a port, and then gets driven to the warehouse. And that tends to be the kind of the port forwarder's sort of domain. So and obviously that's what people have been talking about recently. That these bins have been very expensive. The container prices and this cost of delivery has been going through the roof. What hasn't been talked about so much is actually the cost of the last leg stuff. So actually, once a game reaches a warehouse and how it then goes from the warehouse to the backer, that has increased an unbelievable amount recently. So just like there's been there's something they call a surcharge now, a fuel surcharge. It's hit since Russia, but it was also there with COVID, and it's gone up to now 17%. So the prices have risen 17% in the last few months over that, just on the fuel surcharge things. Yeah, we've got you, and what you're hearing from everybody is that there's all these massive cardboard crises and shortages and stuff like that. The price of materials goes up, and you're seeing numbers that are more like, we talk about interest rates being like 5 to 10% increases and things like that. I mean, the kind of interest rates you're seeing in this domain is like 20 to 50% in certain areas and certain things that you're paying for. So it's very scary. It's a very huge amount, and I know there's a lot of companies that are actually stomaching that loss, that they're doing, and what they're actually providing to consumers is a lot less than what they, is very, the profit margins are being hit just to try and not make these prices increase in comparison to what they're receiving, because the actual interest for the inflation on those things is getting huge. So there's quite a lot of this. The number, the response was actually on the warehousing side and the cardboards and the fuel surcharges and things like that. But on the port forwarder side, obviously the port forwarder kind of bringing it from the factory to the warehouse. We got 7 quotes. We dug deep in with 3 of them, and I need to have backups of backups. Like, I'm just that kind of person. I like having contingency plans. So we had gone deep with 3, and we were actually running 3 parallel port forwarders at the same time. So we had, like, if one of them failed for any reason, we'd have a backup who was then also already spun up and ready to get the containers. Because one of the things you can't have is you can't have product ready in a warehouse and it not move. You have to keep these things moving, because there's a massive cost if things stay in warehouses for too long. So just an example, one container would be about $700 a week to keep it in a warehouse beyond your contracted time once the game has been made. So you can imagine that something like Oathsworn would cost roughly $14,000 a week to keep it in a warehouse. So that's scary money, right? So you need to keep things moving. Once the game is made, it cannot stop till it reaches your door. It really can't. So we had these 3 port forwarders running parallel to each other just in case there was any problems, and we you want to keep these quotes up to date. So obviously, I said we did one in October. We've been doing them throughout this period of time, and up to about 2 weeks ago we had a quote 2 weeks out, which is a very accurate quote, because the prices of shipping tends to change every 2 weeks. They tend to have these 2-week schedules now, and so we had it 2 weeks out. We've been told this is the number. This is safe. This is not going to move much, and if it does, it'll move tiny amounts. It's not going to be very big, and then so we went, okay, we confirmed with the port forward, move ahead, get the containers out moving, and then we had an email a couple of days later. They booked the containers, and there was a new invoice attached, and that invoice came back at 50% higher than we had been quoted 2 days before. And you go, well, you kind of lose your breath at that point. You're like, how do you sort of work?
50% higher was 150, 200,000.
Yeah, overall, yeah, it was like 150,000. It's a crazy money, and so, and you're asking the question, well, how does that happen? How do you get 50%? And the kind of the replies you're getting is, well, things are fluid. Like the market is moving. We don't know, even though, and I'm following container indexes. I'm following the kind of prices and things seem to be going down, but you're seeing these kind of things. And I think one of the things I really wanted to kind of help people realize is that the way that with shipping works is not you don't really have any leverage or power in times of shipping things, especially small companies and things like that. That when you're negotiating with a container, there isn't really much of a negotiation. An invoice comes from on high. They won't even sign contracts. So like publishers don't have contracts with containers. You can't like go 6 months out and say, can I get this price for a container? That no one will sign that. So when you go to a port forwarder, you say, you're kind of like easing this kind of relationship forward. Like, what's a quote look like? How much, can we do this? And you're like, can we confirm this? Like, no, we won't confirm it. Won't promise anything. But if you want to get your goods out of China, you're going to have to agree with us at some point, and you're going to have to move forward with us at some point. And so it's really built on trust. This whole thing is like, you trust that this isn't going to move, and you kind of try and do as much quoting as you can to get it down. But you really don't have a contract that's going to keep you safe in this situation. So if suddenly a port forwarder turns around and says it's 50% more, you're out of luck, right? So we obviously, as a reaction to that, we're like, well, okay, we got to shift. So we said no to that port forward. We moved to our backup, the first one, who was more expensive by about 30 grand than the previous one, but it was still way cheaper than the 50%. So we're like, okay, well, it's going to be a bit more money, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. We went to them. This is 7 days before the containers are leaving. The containers are ready, and that's scary. $700.
The containers that need to continue to move.
Yeah, they are. It's 7 days out now, and those things are kind of revving up. And then we have the we get the confirmation. We get the email confirming it, and we get a new quote and this time it's 30% higher than the last time. So it's not 50% this time, but 30% plus the 30 grand ends up pretty close. And so we're now in a world where that price has now moved 30%. So again, we've been hit by this fact that we couldn't get the accuracy on the quoting. You can't just, it's impossible. Even when you give them all the information, no data's changed here. The same Encode terms, the same delivery addresses, the same things. Just like as a weird aside, like Encode terms, when you're moving containers across the world, because it's such a crazy, convoluted and difficult matrix of logistics, these things called Encode terms have been created, which are basically like a universal language in terms of how things get somewhere. So an Encode term, you might say DAP, which is deliver at place, which basically means you'll pay someone to pick up a thing in one part of the world and deliver it to another part of the world, and they're responsible for the costs involved in that transit, apart from taxes and things like that. And so you can kind of, these terms, these are kind of fairly settled things. So it's not like there's like great grey areas of understanding. The Encode terms make things fairly simple as to what someone's responsibilities are along the way. So it's not even like these quotes can move within those kind of Encode terms. It's, the Encode term is set. But anyway, so back to that. So we're obviously hit by the second thing, and we're like, okay, that's more expensive than the first. Okay, we're moving on. We're going to our third backup. You get to the third backup, and that we have only just been able to spin up that third backup 2 days ago with a container that's left today, and we still don't know the cost of that container right now. We still don't absolutely know, but we've had a commitment, but we've had commitments before. But we're in a world where that sort of thing's happening.
So containers left port, and the price has changed on you twice within a couple of days. And with the container that just left port, you still don't have an invoice that you've been sent or anything that you've signed that's been like, that's the guaranteed price, other than a quote, other than a, hey, this is what we'll do it for.
Yeah,
it could show up at 20% more.
Yeah, it could do. At this point you're already trusting that's not going to happen. You've had commitments, because obviously we've been having conversations with the portfolios at this point saying, look, this has happened to us twice now. We absolutely need to know this isn't going to happen. And we've got a closer relationship with the third, and we know publishers that have used and things like that. So it's there's a bit more safety and things there. Okay. But still, it's a bit. But anyway, so obviously what's interesting there is that I suppose that this isn't really as a direct result of COVID, but it is a direct result of COVID, but not because the price it's not some like container index price thing that's moving this. What it is actually there's actually been a real environment of kind of cowboy kind of frontiersman mentality style stuff going on here from COVID. So before COVID, the world was a very simple place where you could sort of set your watch by some of the container prices, right? You'd have this thing where it'd be about 5 to 10% a year. It was the average, and you could build that into your costings from a Kickstarter perspective. You'd be like, well, if it's going to take me a year, you back up, maybe say you 2 or 3 years on it, and say, look, even if the worst comes to worst, there's still safety there with that kind of price increase. But obviously with COVID, it just blew everything out the water. We closed our pledge manager just before COVID hit, and then like a couple of months afterwards, you're starting to see the containers start to go, and a year later, and it's like it's all up in the air.
So I want to grab you there. I want to jump back for the people that are watching now. So the people that are watching now are the people that are either your biggest fans and invested because they're backers of yours, community members of Quackalope, or individuals who just love the logistics and behind the scenes of this kind of whole story, right? The whole process unfolding. So for those of you that are watching, thanks for joining us. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the conversation now. So I want to start at the beginning. You all worked for 3 years, launched Oathsworn to tremendous result for a first-time publisher. 1.9 raised, a big community. How many total backers was that?
It was over 11,000 at that point.
So over 11,000 games now need to be delivered. Start off with the feeling of having that campaign. Like this was pre-COVID. This was, the world was good. Everything was normal. And you all just in anyone's regards, blew it out of the water.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was one of the best feelings of my life. That I remember because I was at the Dice Tower at the time, and we were playing a playthrough, and Tom said we'd funded, and I was just trying to keep a straight face whilst in front of the camera. Trying to.
Now I know I only had like 3,000 subscribers at the time, but I'm very offended you went to them instead of me. It hurts my feelings,
Man, next time.
Next time, yeah. So you all y'all fund, y'all make it.
Yeah.
You close, and you were telling me that from what you've seen, you think you were one of the, if not the last notable campaign to close the gates before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, it was a bit typical, really. It's like sort of Sod's Law, you know, you kind of do the campaign, you do all your thing, you spend all your time with your fulfillment companies, getting all your shipping numbers together. Then sort of COVID comes and starts ramping up, and this sort of scary number starts happening. But you know, is it like looking back on it now, you can see how bad it's been. But at the time, you're kind of like, well, maybe it'll die down in 6 months, maybe it'll die down in a couple of weeks. You know, no one really kind of knew how bad things were getting, and then it kind of got worse and worse and worse. But yeah, certainly like closing the pledge manager, where you kind of, because you obviously what you're doing with the shipping is you're kind of saying, well, this is how much it's going to cost to ship the game, and you know, all the years before had been like, it's 5-10%. You know, you got your 10% leeway. As long as you've got that, you're going to be safe, and we did, and obviously we'd funded, which was incredible, right? I mean. You know, so actually, just really being honest, like this, like just the level, how fantastically we funded in Kickstarter was going to lead to. I mean, being honest, it was going to be like $500,000 we were going to be left with. Like that's a company there. You know, we'd be able to pay back the loans that we'd all been putting into the company to get it done. We'd be able to start work on another development of a game, you know, and everything was roses. It was just so fantastic, and everyone was elated in the team to be able to have that kind of money to be able to do it. And then the number started creeping up, and the number started coming down about what we're going to be left with. And as I said, like, you know, this last couple of weeks, when that 50% hit, and then the 30% hit, and then the change happens, and then we've also had, in the same period of time, we've had sort of final kind of updates from fulfillment companies and things like that were running numbers, and those have been updated, and then there's been more, you know, inflation's going up in all these places and things, and suddenly that number starts disappearing. It just, this, you know, a couple of days ago it slipped below zero, and that's when you know your heart's sort of sinking. You know, you're like, wow, this is, everything's changed now from this amazing kind of situation where you were going to be in. Suddenly you're kind of in a world where it's you know we're you know treading water and needing help.
And just as someone who is a advocate and kind of knows the point of reference on the conversation, that 500,000 pre-COVID was profit, but profit before you'd paid yourself and the other owners back for the 3 years of development work you did, or the initial investments you made. It would be profit before you'd, you know, put $250,000 aside to launch the next campaign, or buy yourself time to develop and produce and make something happen. And so when you break it, like it'd be great if it was 500,000 going to your pocket to pay for 3-4 years of work, right? Like that's a good wage. That's not the reality of that number, even then.
No. I mean, yeah, it would have obviously been the cost. I mean, it costs us hundreds of thousands to get to Kickstarter before we even got there, right? So it was obviously there's kind of things there, and then there's the you know, obviously the time and the team and stuff like that that'd be there, but certainly,
you'd have a company. You'd have an incredible game, and it would have delivered to 11,000 people.
Yeah.
And then COVID happened, and so talk about that next. What I mean, we're about a little bit over 2 years now from that entry point. Talk about kind of going through production, watching the numbers change and raise, and how you as a company and how kind of the wider world of board gaming was dealing with or telling you to deal with the situation.
So what obviously one of the things, the key message that's coming to the publishers is like, you got to wait and see what's happening, because obviously you're in a relationship with the community, right? I want to be as transparent with the community as possible and let them know what we know, and a lot of what this situation has caused is a lot of unknown for everybody. No one really knows what the future will be like. No one can commit to things. Like, you know, the world before COVID was a world where you could make promises, and you could build stuff on trust and say, this is going to look like this and it's going to end up like that. And what so many publishers are now in the situation of is like, well, we've started something in this world of being able to commit, and we're now in a world where there's not this ability to predict the future. The future is this kind of like chaotic miasma of craziness, and you're trying to, within that, trying to bring sort of games home and things like that. And obviously, like, it depends on the types of companies you're talking to, because, you know, bigger companies, they've had previous profits, they've had previous games and successes that they can kind of float to a degree through these situations, and they're able to they stay buoyant throughout it. But obviously the smaller companies that got 1 game, 2 games in their heads, they're just doing this sort of part-time or trying to, they don't have any budget that can deal with this kind of hurricane, right? It's like a little kayak in a storm. You ain't got a chance. You're not some sort of giant kind of like tanker ship or something. So that's so when we got out of COVID, when COVID was happening, we were like, well, we can't know for sure, so we need to wait until we're closer and closer and closer. And so a lot of the period of that first year was just like watching and waiting, just sitting on the sidelines, just seeing where it's going to go. Kept going up. As we got closer to the actual manufacturing, we were able to like pin this down. It's like, okay, now we definitely need to start pinning down numbers and getting this right. And that's when we got that kind of big $1.82 million kind of bomb dropped on us. And that's when it was like all stations, we had to kind of find the best way of dealing with that.
So at that point, the $1.82 million quote, the entire Kickstarter project quote for shipping and getting a game into people's hands, we're going to start talking about the logistics nightmare that you went through to solve that. Or maybe it was a fun puzzle. I don't know. I don't know if you choose to do it on your off time, but we're going to talk about the steps that you took to bring that number down to a point where you don't have to ask your backers for $50, $60 a piece to ship a game the size of Oathsworn. I mean, this is a beast of a game. Do you know about what you initially charged for shipping?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the region, but I said, like, generally speaking, it was about 500. It was about we took about 570,000 to cover us on all the shipping and all the the last leg stuff and things. That was going to be
myself in the States. What would around where I would have paid?
Depending on the pledge, but it was probably between like 35 and 45, something like that.
Yeah. And so honestly, attaching a $50 additional charge to a pledge is something that we're seeing a lot of companies either eat or consider doing, or a lot of companies now that are launching games during the era of the shipping crisis are charging $50, $80 for shipping. And they're not, necessarily doing it front side of the campaign, but like if you told me that Oathsworn was going to cost me $50 to $70 to ship, I'd be like, that seems totally in line. If you told me that it was going to cost $100, I'd be like, pricey but worth it. If you told me it was going to cost $30, I'd be like, you're insane. That's not where the state of the world is. And so talk about with that 1.8, what had to be done to start addressing that issue.
So we kind of knew what was going to be coming. In a few months' time, we were going to be looking at moving 250 tons of board games, right? And you've got to try and get that across the world. Now, as I said, there's lots of things that you can't do. You can't have these games stop once they're there. They have to keep moving, and so you've got to make sure that's the people able to receive those games and do things. So so pretty much had to drop everything because this was make or break for everything. So it was going really deep with this. As so as I said, like getting people on the ground to go around to these logistics companies and make sure that we had we were basically just because one of the things that is which is very common. So most small board game companies, ourselves included, that you have to rely on sort of bigger fish to kind of get a product made in the world. You have to rely on bigger factories. You have to rely on Kickstarter to be able to sell your thing, to be able to get to an audience. You're relying on these sort of bigger systems that are in place, because reality is you're trying to make a product in a global level, and a few people trying to do that is very, very difficult. So what obviously most publishers do is they use fulfillment companies or trusted names within the board game world, people who are known for being able to take games, package them up, send them out well, deal with all the customer stuff and things like that. So you have these kind of fulfillment centers. Much smaller companies, very sort of small companies, they actually do that themselves. So they get the games from China, they package them up in their own homes, or they go and rent out a kind of an area in a thing somewhere, and they actually do the boxing up there. They do their own boxing. They get family members involved to kind of.
I know a few people with garage or guest room storage.
Yeah, and so you'd be surprised how much we're still like this kind of, this growing industry where people are just doing things grassroots out of their own homes to cottage industry board gaming, and that's still a big part of our world. And like you get a bit, you get sort of bigger companies that are doing the fulfillment stuff, and they're able to take now. Because there is just so so it's not it's really been like, it's been a 6-month full-time job, me just having to spin up the knowledge and get up to speed and make sure I know everything that's happening in this logistics chain that's doing it. Most people don't have that kind of time, right? They don't have they can't. An average producer is trying to do all the campaign management, the community management, the manufacturing, all that stuff. They haven't got the time to spin this. It's kind of like a professional position, and most people don't have that. Most publishers don't have the ability to have a position like that. So so often people are trusting these fulfillment companies to be able to grease the wheels on that and make it so that they can do that. Now, the fulfillment companies, generally speaking, they're going to be a fair amount more expensive than finding your own solution to these things. It's just the way the world works, right? If you can pay anyone to do anything for you, it's just going to cost you an arm and a leg to do it. And most people have to rely on that because we don't have the capacity to do it otherwise. But in this situation, we have been fortunate enough to be in the capacity that we can actually kind of get really deep and do it ourselves. So we've got fantastic people, like I've got Bastian over in Germany and Samantha over in the US who helps me like find these companies, and we kind of get into these are lengthy conversations. It takes a long time to get quotes and things like that, and get all your dimensions and your requirements down, and all your spreadsheets and things done. So there's this kind of lengthy process you have to go to. But what it allows you to do is, as I said, we've got into about 50 companies overall in these things, and managed to bring this number down. And there's pitting against, you have to pit them against each other a little bit, and there's negotiation and stuff like that. And you find a lot of cowboys, a lot of companies that are just sort of taking the mick. A lot of them, the ones that you'll find easiest are by far the most expensive. And to be honest, if you want to find a good company that's going to be able to deliver a game for you, you need to dig real hard, real deep, because if you want it, they're going to deliver the game for you in a cheap way. So they're going to do it well and cheap. It's very easy to get kind of well and expensive and quick, but you can't get that kind of Venn diagram or whatever of efficiency. So doing that was kind of the main objective, and that brought it down a fair way. And then obviously, because it was outside of winter, the price of the containers were coming down. That helped a lot, and that kind of made to bring it down to a level where we were at that kind of 750 level again, that was going to save us basically at that point. And then everything else went awry.
What was the logistics and kind of numbers that you were dealing with when it came to finding people like actually on the ground, like basically becoming your own distribution hub in a way? Were there any steps of that were shockingly complicated or easier than you assumed? And because for me, I'm thinking of like coordinating with a variety of people on a variety of different contents and locations, trying to talk to these giant businesses. That seems like a puzzle that I wouldn't want to try to solve.
Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, man. Like this has not been fun, but yeah, and to be honest, like, it gives you a major respect for people who are actually in this world, because it's a world that I can't imagine anyone would really want to know. You couldn't pay me enough to live in this world for any longer than need be, because it's a scary place to be. Everything's reactionary. Everything's just you need, everything's turning on a dime. There's no certainties like really in this world. It's a very difficult place to live in. So there's definitely respect for people who can live in this world in logistics and in the warehousing and stuff like that, and continue it for a long period of time. But so probably the main thing actually is the act of quoting. Like the way that we're used to as consumers, right? When we buy something, is we're used to saying like, oh look, there's a price for a thing, and you go and you're like, oh, I'll order that thing that's for that price, and you get what the thing is that you ordered. That isn't really like that in the world of fulfillment. Like when you get into fulfillment stuff, there's so many areas. It might be like there's so many areas like, how much does it cost to do a barcode? How much does every pick and pack thing that you're doing cost? What sort of materials are you using, and how thick are they going? There's like every tiny little minutiae of things. And what happens is when you kind of first approach a company, you're trying to like sift through dozens of companies to try and find something that's good, that's going to be good for the backers, to keep the costs down. And when you're doing that, you're going through it and you're trying, you're asking for quotes, and you give all the details, you give all these information about this is how big all the SKUs are, which is a SKU. An SKU is like the technical term for like an item that goes into a box, like so. And so you have all these SKUs, and you give them dimensions, the weights, the sizes, all what you want, double wall, not triple walled, and all this kind of thing, and different fillers and stuff. You give them these lists. But what happens is that they give you a quote and they kind of try and they can't spend hundreds of hours getting you the quote. It's just too wasteful for most companies. So what they do is they kind of, I think, from what I've gathered really in this process, is that they tend to give you a kind of vague quote, like this should be around this sort of number, but they don't tell you that. They tell you this is the quote. And so what happens is you get this kind of fuzzy resolution at the beginning when you do quoting. As you get deeper and deeper, it kind of is supposed to tighten up as you get closer. But what ends up happening is that as it gets tighter in terms of data, the price tends to do this, right? And so and what can often happen is you pick this company because they were down here when you started, and this other company you said no to. And actually, when you go past it, they do that, and they cross each other because as you get closer, the quote gets a lot more expensive. And so that's the problem, is that because you're making these plans 6 months out, 5 months out, 4 months out, you're having to make major decisions about where containers are going to go in the world and how they're going to move through the system. You need to have a long time window to be able to do that. But at the same time, your quotes at this part where you're making that decision are very fuzzy still. And that's where you get this problem of you run into this stuff where sometimes you don't have enough time. You don't yet have the quote accuracy, even though as a company you've given them the accuracy of the quote. You should be getting a number that should be clear. What actually happens behind the scenes is that number tends to edge up as they say, oh well, there's this thing we didn't foresee, or there's this thing that has changed, the material cost has changed, or the man hours it will take to do something changes, and so there's real fuzziness around this number. That shouldn't be, because as a company you've done your diligence, you've gone like, right, this is exactly what I want you to quote on, and you don't get an exact number for that when you get it back, even though people claim it is. So that's a real big problem when you're trying to predict these things, especially now. And what happens is obviously the companies at the moment, they have a real good reason for saying that, warehousing companies and things, because they say, well, war in Ukraine, then we're seeing 17% increases in fuel surcharges. Our cardboard costs have gone up 30% in 2 weeks. And so you're like, well, you can't. It's very difficult to argue with that, because you don't know their costs. You don't know all these things when you're going into it. You're just like, well, yeah, is that how much of that do you believe, or how much do you kind of then start thinking, actually, were they doing this deliberately throughout? So it gets very difficult to be able to see that, because you just don't have the data to be able to call those shots, because you can't see their numbers and things. But you certainly can see that when you have a pattern of say 20 of them, and all of them are saying the cardboard costs are going up 30%, you could be like, okay, yeah, this is a real problem. This is really happening now, and these costs are justified.
So one of the things I've noticed as we've been talking, and I know your numbers are from the top of your head, so some of them might not be 100% pinpoint accurate, but a lot of people, when they talk about this conversation, myself included, talk about freight going from 5,000 to 30,000. And that's our big reference point. That kind of sums up the entire ecosystem as a whole. We're like, freight went up by 10 times or whatever. That's why shipping is ripping publishers apart. And part of that's true. But you can look at the freight market, and like you said, it's dipping back down, where it might have once been $30,000 instead of $3,000. It now might be somewhere around 15 to 20 for a big, for one container, one shipping container to bring packages, a big, however many tons of packages from China over into the States or over into the distribution hubs. But one of the other things that we've talked about, and that you've pointed to a few times, is the other areas of small percentage growth that for a publisher turns into a massive across-the-board escalation. And I'd love to just have you point at some of those and break down some of those numbers that we've already touched on a little bit, just kind of in a contained subject. Because I think for me, I don't know that most consumers should be told about all of these. But the people that are watching now, it is interesting and highly informative to understand that the cost of everything is inflating in a way that is not good for the market, and it's not only the publishers that are being eaten by it, and it's not only the consumers that are being eaten by it. It's also in a lot of cases the manufacturers themselves that are being eaten by it, and like everyone across the chain right now when it comes to production is just taking losses after losses, and more and less in some areas, but our marketplace is arguably not healthy. So talk about that for a bit. I gave you a lot of areas there, but talk about the logistics side of things and get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, probably the biggest area. So interestingly, within the because we often talk about the container number, right? But the container is only part of the journey, because when you go from, you actually have to send a truck to pick up the container, and then the container has to get to port, goes from port to port, and then when it gets inland, it then has to go to the warehouse, which may be, like for instance in the US, it might be several states away, the warehouse, compared to things. So you then have to either train it, you rail it, or you truck it, and one thing that's been incredibly increased since this period is the lorrying of the containers in that last leg across places like Europe, UK, and the US. These things have got incredibly high trucking numbers. Obviously, there's been trucking problems and things that have increased these prices. So it may be, for instance, that the container itself price goes down. Like so here's a real world example. Is we saw a container price go down from like 19 to 15, but we saw the trucking price go up from 1,500 to 6. So you're like, well, hold on, wait, that's worse now.
Yeah.
Even though the container price has gone down, the truck price has gone up so much it actually outstrips the container price. So you can have that happening. The other areas of that obviously hit the cardboard areas. So like just as in the course of this kind of getting ready for manufacturing, the world was hit by a kind of cardboard crisis, which isn't quite as exciting as a container crisis.
It's not as flashy.
Yeah, I mean, containers are flashy. Everyone loves a container, but cardboard, that's a bit too far. But yeah, so the cardboard crisis hit, and you saw increases of 50% on cardboard, right? Well, we're in a cardboard industry. This is the analog world. We love cardboard. What happens when that price goes up 50%? So we saw we were really good, we were really blessed in a way, Panda, our manufacturer, they saved us from a lot of the price increases. They would we know how bad this is going to be for everyone. We're going to hit stomach that. So they're taking a hit with us, in this thing. But even then, we still saw 25% increases in the box price, for instance, and things like that. And it obviously changes your manufacturing number. So our manufacturing number. With the development went up to like 2.4 million, just with with these sort of changes in component costs. And obviously the box in board games you kind of get hit double, because you've got the box that you're making full of cardboard, and then you've got the carton box which is made of cardboard that you put the box in to send it out to the backer. So there's all cardboard all everywhere, and you've got any price that hits that really hits everybody. It hits you all the way down. So that's another. Fairly big one. There's I said the other things, like with the quoting situation, with what will often happen is that you'll have quotes. You'll be told that it will take this long to do a thing, and in reality, when you actually do the thing, it takes twice as long in man hours. And obviously, if you're paying like $40 an hour for man hours, which you often are for like warehousing and things like that, that hits you very hard very quickly if the amount of man hours it takes to do stuff. So that's not really an inflationary thing, but it's just to do with that like inaccuracy you get in quoting, which is unfortunate, because you were very sure about how long it would take to do this thing. You were kind of like mapped it all out, but then it sort of changes mid-plan. But yeah, so off the top of my head, those are kind of the two bigger ones, are the cardboard and the kind of inland freight stuff has been particularly bad. You've also got things like things that probably aren't so helpful to have happened in the middle of COVID, was that the EU had a major tax reform. For the first time in years, they completely reformatted their tax system, which comes with all kinds of problems, because you've got to obviously then go through your accounting stuff, and you've got to change your accounting, you've got the things that where you were fine before, you're no longer fine, and new things are now under regulation, and you've got to be up to speed with all that as well. You've got all that, you've got something, you're an accountant.
I've seen publishers take varying different approaches to VAT taxes and just that entire changing landscape. I've seen some stomach the cost to the tune of tens, if not close to $100,000+, and just eat it and lose profit. I've seen some tell backers that it's their government and their responsibility, and kind of in a way, while it's hard, kind of say screw you, because they just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. I've seen some split the cost and try to navigate it, lump it into shipping, like that entire process. While I don't know it as well, I'm just kind of adjacent to it, being in the States. It's just added extra coal on what it was already a really strained industry and a really strained publisher base and a really strained community. The community, I think, is rightfully frustrated because, most of them didn't understand the consequences if they did vote for it or didn't vote for it themselves. And government is so far out of our ability to control or adjust or anything. It just feels like a doubling down and kind of the punishment of the world. And so I understand the hard part on everyone's side of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, the VAT is something that's always kind of, it has to be paid, and it's kind of, we accounted for it as the thing. I mean, depending on the way that you do it, some obviously say some companies are charged for it. I mean, we wanted to, we wanted to be as pro backer as we could be. So what we did is we said, look, we're friendly shipping, that we're actually going to we're going to take that cost on ourselves. So the VAT, whatever it ends up being, is on us, and we're going to sort that. So that obviously is, it's another cost that then is sort of coming out. So it's not something that the backers had to pay for and had to worry about. Which is, I'm really happy we've been able to do it, but certainly it's another thing that we weren't able to. It wasn't, it's another thing that had to be accounted for. But yeah, like, so there's all that kind of thing that's happening on the side, but yeah, so like those fuel surcharges as well coming in. Like if you see 17% cost in the 17% increase in the cost to get your game from your warehouse to the backer, so that's 17% more. But I mean, that might end up being, in a world where that cost it could be 300,000-400,000 to start with. You're looking at maybe 80 grand increase suddenly, like, that happens because of, oil problems and things like that. So yeah, you've got that consideration as well. But you see what you get is like any one of these things wouldn't kill you. It's when everything is lined up one after another consecutively for years. That's where it kind of starts flipping the situation. And yeah, I mean it's a really difficult time. Like personally, like you start to wonder, like, if it's going to be, if this doesn't start turning around at some point, like what is the future of the Kickstarter board game? Can the world keep stomaching the kind of prices that we're going to be seeing? Is it going to change? Did we live in a golden age, 2 years ago where, everything was kind of rosy and it was going to work, and then things are going to change? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see it roll out. I think what the governments do and how the world goes in the next year is really going to start telling, and obviously it's hitting retail as well, just the same, because it's the same deal. You've got a thing in China, and it's got to get, or you've got a thing in the manufacturers, you've got to get it to the backer.
Which doesn't make it any easier for you, by the way, because they're competing with stores like Walmart and Target and Amazon, who are willing to just say yes when a quote comes back higher. If the margins on a lot of your consumer line goods from China are significantly higher than your margins on luxury goods like board games coming in, and so it's a thing that a lot of people don't factor in. Like dice manufacturers, like, let's do something that's hobby adjacent. People who make dice in China, ship them over here, and then sell them to backers, are making handfuls of money over top of board game publishers, because dice have a easy manufacturing process, easy-ish, and a insane margin when it comes to, just like most consumer goods. And people will reference that, and they'll be like, oh, well, the normal way businesses operate is there's this degree of profit and this degree of cost and this degree of ability to be flexible. And if you raise $2 million in Kickstarter, that means you should be walking away with this, and you should be able to get your game into retail and sell it, and Target's going to be holding your game, right? Like, Oathsworn's doing a big appearance at Walmart in 6 months, and you're going to make $70 million off of that. Isn't that how the logistics system works? It's like, no, that's just not. That's how Scrub Daddy works, that I have downstairs in the sink. But it's not the margins that our industry has ever or currently sustains. If you want a company that does those margins, go to your local retail store and pick up Trouble or pick up Monopoly, and take a look at what you get inside. And then send that to every publisher that you love and say, I would like you to make my game with these components, because that's where your margins are. That's the bandwidth you have, right? And I find it very interesting, because I don't think there's a lot of other consumer businesses that are willing to take on the degree to which I've seen board game publishers take on cost and put themselves at risk. And it's because we're hobbyists, and it's because you, like us, love what you've made, and it's an artistic expression, and it's a passion project, and it's a dream towards a career that you're pursuing, right? Like, but I from my side, as someone that is freelance for 9 years, and like understands the value of work, like the reality is that backers and publishers need to settle with is like, this is not sustainable. And our favorite companies need to be able to pay themselves. Our favorite games need to be able to make a profit. Like, if I want more Frosthaven, if I want more Kingdom Death, if I want more, whatever it is, the people that are behind the scenes doing the logistics work of creating the thing that I love have to at some point make a good profit. It's a very hard and frustrating position to be in for everyone, I think. And I have the honor of being in this weird middle zone. Because as a consumer, I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know the logistics that go into the back end. I didn't know the margins that existed before. It's a very, very interesting space we have. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on, one of the things that I asked to have this conversation with you, like you were like, hey, is an interview something that you'd be interested in? Because we want a chance to talk, we want a chance to share, we want a chance to help the industry. And one of the first questions I asked in response to that, before I had agreed to have this conversation, was, have you been communicating with your backers? So talk about that going into the Kickstarter, talk about your communication methods, and talk about how big of a challenge or not a challenge it's been to maintain the communication that you have. Because for me, I put out a video a week ago talking about like a line that I'm drawing. Like, I expect at this point, when there's so much uncertainty, I expect some type of communication from my publishers. I think there's too much up in the air, and for the sake of the backer and for the sake of the publisher, I think there has to be an understanding that like, we don't need to know everything, but we need to know a little bit. We need to know if there's going to be rolling delays, or if you're going to potentially ask us for more funds. And if you'd came to the backers, or you'd came to me, as much as I believe in your game and as much as I'm an advocate for publishers, if you'd say, hey, we haven't really talked to anyone for a year, but this is where we are, I feel like that's such a different conversation. That's an unfriendly conversation. That's a conversation that is, I don't know what the journey's been like, but you also haven't shared. And so now you want to come share, but you're only sharing once the news is the worst. Like, once you've got to come ask, and that sucks. And so, sorry, I've went on too long, but talk about communication, what you've done as a project manager, what you've done with the community of Oathsworn, and how you've navigated sharing too much versus sharing too little. Like what's been that journey?
Yeah, it's definitely a conundrum you're always wrestling with, like, as a publisher. Is how much do you say, and how much do you share? You want to share everything, but then how much do people actually want to hear? How deep? This is a long form conversation. How many words have we already spoken here? How much would people want to listen to that? Over things. So you kind of like trying to pick the things that people actually want to hear, whilst also being as transparent as possible about things. And also, because obviously when you're running a business, there's a lot of stuff you don't have immediate answers to. You're like, well, like when COVID was hitting, mid-July or whatever, 2020, that question of like, well, will this affect our shipping prices? And the answer is, well, you just don't know. You don't know until the time comes. So who knows what's going to happen, where things are going to move in 6 months. We wanted to be transparent and do good communication. So we've always committed to an update every month that we do, which kind of gives us progress reports and kind of updates on the development of the game. I think it's been really good. Actually, it's really helpful. It actually helps keep us accountable. It helps keep the backer informed. So that's really valuable. That was a tip I think I can lay at the feet of Jamie Stegmaier. I think I remember him reading something about his thing about, certainly about the time actually as well. Just think, people knowing that you're going to be turning up every week is a way of building trust. Right? Every month when I turn up on the second Monday of the month and I have an update out for people know that I'm still here and I'm still working, I'm still doing this thing. Disappear from that. So I think there's something really valuable about that. I'd really suggest that to all publishers, anyone listening, like just being that the value of commitment to the backers with certain time frames and certain levels of transparency and things like that is super valuable. So we've been doing that every month, and we've obviously got all our communications and stuff like that. So you can always reach us by emails and things like that. And we're here all the time, and we try to commit to doing it the same day, in terms of replying and things like that if we can. But yeah, and so obviously when we had, like, for instance, the big drop at, like, in October, that was going to be like a £1.8 million quote. Like, there's a real question mark there. Like, what do you share that this terrifying thing has happened, or do you not share it? And when you talk about sharing it, like, because if you say this is the number, people will think that's true. But I knew that's not true. That's not a true number. That's a number that is being quoted from this situation, which we're about to change. I know I'm going to go deep into this and try and change this number. I'm going to bring it down. So it's not the real number. So you always have that sort of things, like, how do you know exactly whether or not it's right to share? So people have to forgive me if they wished I had shared this information earlier and at the time. But at the time, it feels like that this wouldn't have been true to have said it either at the time. It's I can say it post the fact now the number is different, and that it would have been a different number, but certainly at the time it felt like it wasn't the right thing to share. But yeah, so I definitely think it's really good to be able to tell the backers, like, what's going on, and try and keep them updated. And to be honest, we weren't perfect at that first, like, doing it. So there's always a progress report of where we are. That wasn't something we were doing right at the beginning. We're actually kind of picked that up, as some of the backers were mentioning that'd be great for them to have, because we were all getting excited about the game. It's all about the things we'd unlocked, and all these new characters we were making, and all the new chapters we were doing, and all the cool progress that was being made on the story, and like, all the stuff that kind of naturally gets you excited. So I was like, do people really care, like, whether or not the shipping price has gone up or not yet? Sure. 6 months out from when it's actually going to happen. But yeah, so but tell you what, though, get long enough in, and it certainly, actually, from a commitment side of things, there is a commitment to it. And I want to be careful, because I feel like it's nice to be able to say how that we've done stuff, and we've been trying to do things well and do it by best practice and all that sort of thing. But in reality, like, we're very blessed. Like, we're in a world, we're in a situation where I can commit the kind of time to communication and do that. Yeah. I mean, it can take me a full day. It can take maybe a day or two to write an update, right? If you've got somebody who's doing Kickstarters, and they're a hopeful who's trying to, they built this out of their garage, basically, and they're trying to build a dream, and they put all their savings into it, and it's just got them to a Kickstarter, and they're having 15 different hats they're wearing. Communication, that is fundamentally different for people like that than it is for some other people.
I mean,
if they've got a team of people in communication.
The 90 people I have not responded to through text after publicly sharing my phone number, and the Patreon community I have that have had inconsistent updates, know that, like, I struggle with that in the same way that I think publishers do and creatives do, and it is hard but important to try to be consistent and repetitive, and I'm one to talk. Like again, I'm black. Like, I have black eyes across the board on being effective at it, but I'm constantly trying, right? And I think that's what backers want to know. Like people want to see, even when you have missteps, or even when things aren't quite perfect, or things don't go as planned, as long as they see that there's someone passionate there that's putting energy and effort and desire in, they're willing to forgive a lot. They're willing to give a ton of grace, which is what I advocate for on the community side. Like, whether or not someone's communicating, whether or not someone's done things right, whether or not a publisher has told you all the information that they should have. I advocate for publishers to communicate. I advocate for backers to extend grace, because right now, stuff is not fun at all.
Yeah, and I think I think with board games, like, there's a difference between, like, games designing and publishing. They're very different worlds, and part of the
publishing, it's a whole different skill set.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people who come to Kickstarter with they're designers, they're creatives. They've got a dream they want to bring into the world. But then publishing is a very different world, and I think that realistically, if you're trying to honor your backer and you're actually trying to build a community and things like that, the publishing skills of, like, turning up on time, repeated communications, like, that's part of what should be a plan in a Kickstarter. Kickstarter. So I think it's definitely something that people should be planning for those things. So but it's I can imagine that what's probably happening is that some people aren't publishers by heart, like sort of things. It's more maybe they're more on the creative side. That's
some people
struggle with communication and things.
Some people see 1.8 and instead of deciding to face it, they burn out for a month, and then they get behind on production, and then they get overwhelmed, and then they I'm the type of person that has spurts of high productivity, and then I fall asleep for a week. Or I've noticed over the last 2 years, my emotional bandwidth is strained, and it's strained in a good direction and also a terrible direction. I am highly empathetical in sometimes situations that makes it really good. I can be an advocate for people. I can fight. I can help people. I can go out of my way. And then at times it's really bad because I'll consume stuff that's just negative, and it'll shut me down for a week, right? And especially being a public figure in a space that's like a constant thing. And a publisher who is successful skyrockets themselves to this public position that they've never had to be in before. And as an artist or creative, burnout and becoming overwhelmed and becoming not being able to just address and try to deal with the thing consistently and concisely, being able to look at it like you did and said, well, that number is not going to be real in 6 months because I'm going to work really hard. That's really hard to see. I get publishers that just stop talking, because what do you say? Hey, my world's falling apart, and I just got a quote for the entire funding goal of our Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to that.
Yeah. It's certainly really difficult for a lot of publishers, because for a lot of publishers, what they've done is they've literally put their life savings into something that was a dream that they then spent years of work, all the hours that God sent, that they weren't working their day job, they were working on this idea. They kind of scrabble towards this thing. They finally get this thing together. They put it to the community, and the community just rises to the occasion, gets things fantastic, and then this thing happens that can just tear your world apart. It's really emotionally, that's pretty difficult to deal with. I was in a pretty bad place a year ago. I think things have been so crazy now. I've learned to ride those zen out a little bit and ride the chaos a little bit to the end.
Sure.
And trusting as well, trusting this thing's gonna, we've got a really good team of people, and I know, and trusting this is going to sorting itself out, and trusting the backers, right? Just honestly, it seems trite, but when a backers, when you say something like, maybe we're in a world where we're gonna need some more funding to get this thing over the line, and the comments are like, we got you, man, we got you, we're with you. That genuinely changes your day.
Earned that by communicating, and there's going to be people that are pissed, and those voices will probably feel like they're the loudest. But what we've learned through social media, through running Quackalope, through other publishers' experiences, the 10 people that scream about you taking an extra $9 from them, they're not your community. Who cares? So let's talk. I've got two last things I want to touch on, and then if there's anything else you want to dig into, but I've got two last things I want to touch on. What is the step now? What are we doing now? And I know at this point people have probably read the update, they're familiar with it, but just talk about where we've gotten to and what the ask is going to be from the community.
Yeah, so we're in a world where we shot past zero last week, and so we're roughly, it looks like we're roughly about 270 ish in the hole at the moment. We need to get out of that hole now. We couldn't ask the backers for that. It's too much, I believe. But also, we're in a world where we don't have to. Thank God, we're in a world where we've got our own commitments to the campaign and stuff like that. We're going to come half. We're going to throw what we have at it to get us to about halfway.
You have personal money.
Yeah, so we're going to get. We'll get there. Probably about a third of the way, just over a third of the way. The rest of it, we can't, and so we're going to have to ask for it to help cover that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and have to do it where unfortunately it's not going to be an optional situation, because that does not work. It won't work in this situation because it will be unoptional, because the unoptional, it means we just can't afford to send it that last leg of the road. So we're going to be doing where we do it by pledges, so a standee version called core pledge and all in, and we're going to ask for I think it's about $8.14 and 19 for that, and then that will get us to that place where we cover the bit that we can't, and that will hopefully get us back to zero. And with all transparency, it's not exactly zero. There's a little bit of a leeway there, just because we're still expecting we're still in the same world we were in when prices changed before. So we've had to give a little bit of a buffer there just to make sure that we can get over that in case there's anything changes there. But with boats on the water and things like that, we're actually seeing actual numbers now rather than the kind of quotes that we've had that have been more airy fairy in the past. But yeah, so we're doing that, and if you are a backer, need to sort of you should be getting an email through from CrowdOps. We log on and fulfill that balance, and sort of save the game. Sorry, I forgot there was anything else in the question.
I wanted to know where we are now, which is kind of I suppose what you've gone through. Now you and I have talked about some things when it comes to the plan for the people that have to pay extra shipping. Is that something, ahead of being able to talk with the other people? Like for instance, I will cut this out if we're not talking about the 10%. Are you committed to that? Is that a thing you're doing, or is it still a thing you're brainstorming?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry, I should have forgot that. So one of the things I really wanted to do with this,
I think you're insane, by the way, just so your audience is watching, just so your community is watching. You told me about this idea, and my advice was, that's ridiculous. If it sounds too good. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
So I really wanted to make this so that it was going to be a win for everybody, right? Like it wasn't just going to be this pain point that was just going to be upsetting. So one thing I want to do is give something back. So what we've been able to do is we're going to do a gift voucher, a kind of discount that we're going to have. We're able to commit to that every backer that kind of fulfills the game now with us, we're going to be able to give them a 10% discount on all future Kickstarters that we do for life. So that's Kickstarters and Pledge Managers going forward, and that 10% will be automatically applied. There's no codes there. It's something we can do on our end and do it automatically, and it will just
connected to email addresses, or what's the
that's right, yeah.
That?
So if your email address ever changes on Kickstarter, for instance, or on CrowdOps, then you need to tell us that to apply that. But apart from that, it should just automatically connect in with emails, and it was based on like a single pledge per email account. And so that hopefully that's gonna make it. We're asked for less than 10% now, and you'll get more than 10% off in the future with the future Kickstarters and things like that. And just wanted it to not be all pain, and be something that was going to be.
Which is, it's cool. It's cool. I think you're silly, but it's very cool. And as a backer, it's such a hard situation that I think it's admirable that you're still trying to cover the cost, even in some way, even though it's through a dedication or a commitment to the people who are showing up to support you now. Now, we haven't confirmed this. You guys haven't been able to figure out the logistics of it. Just so the audience knows, I'm advocating for a promo pack or something to let me throw an extra $100 at you, like 20 cards that are just ridiculously overpriced, so I can support and back you guys up. I don't know if the logistics of that, or if your artists can even handle something like that. But if that happens and they swing over to the Pledge Manager and that's available, I'd encourage anyone who just has the resources and wants to support publishers doing things right in this space, to do that. Again, you haven't even talked to the team yet. I'm fighting for it. It's on my channel, damn it. So I'm going to mention it. That being said, I want to end the conversation at a different point. We're talking about the chaos of the last 2 years. We're talking about, an elated campaign that did astronomical numbers when it comes to the board game space, right? We're talking about 5 years of development. And now we're talking about people actually getting your game into their hands. And I, like I said, didn't back your game in Pledge Manager. I was interested. I was excited. I didn't really have the cash. I was strapped. It wasn't until I got a chance to sit down and play this on TTS that I went all in, right? That I was excited about it. So coming from someone who you converted because I thought the gameplay was just so cool, this is not the final step for your company. You're not delivering and then saying like, oh, okay, board games, that was great. That's it. And I know your mind isn't on what comes next. Your mind right now is on delivery. But I want to end this conversation from people that are obsessed with you and are really following along. What's your hope? What's your theoretical hope going forward for the company? What can people be excited about? What's that 10% discount possibly going to be applied to?
Oh well, like Oathsworn, part of what we were doing the first year before we even started designing the game was we designed the world, and we had there's this crazy story that this is going on. So Oathsworn itself is a fully contained story. It takes you to a really good point in the history of the world, but there's a whole world beyond that we want to go into, and so really excited to, I've been between all my spreadsheets and things, the plans for the next Oathsworn game have been percolating and stuff. And then also I'm an Omni gamer. There's a whole bunch of games I want to see made. I do love the good miniature games and Euro games, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to get going there. So there are more games planned than there is time to make them so far at the moment. So we're ready. We're raring to go on the next game once we can just get this game to everybody, and sort of honour the backer with what we said, because this is what the whole thing's about. It's like, it's just, we want to honour the backers for what they did. They were so amazing. Like they changed my life. Like, doing this has been incredible. Getting to this point, and it's a shame it's kind of come to this kind of rough spot here, because it was all going to be kind of smooth. But I just want to thank you all to all the backers for making this possible, because what you believed in like 3 years ago is kind of here. I've got the first copies of the game, and it's pretty big. It's actually the all-in box is bigger than all my children. My children can fit inside the all-in box. I've got 3 of them, and we feed them a lot. So these guys, these are massive kids. It also weighs more than my 3-year-old. So it's pretty big, this thing. So it's quite exciting to see what everyone's going to think of when they get the game.
Very cool. I'm excited to get a copy. I'm hoping to be at the front end of delivery, so I can unbox it and share it and start diving into it on the channel. You kind of summed up. I was going to give you the chance at the very end of this, because at this point, the only people that are watching are the people that are potentially in love with you. Which you might need to have a conversation with your family about that, because there's a few of them that might be a little too obsessed. But in all seriousness, like, the people who are watching at this point are fans and friends and community members, and that's true for you. That's true for me. So I appreciate people who are willing to hear the conversation out and willing to be a part of it, and I appreciate people who have pushback and challenges and are concerned. Like, this is a stressful time for I think everyone in our space, and the weird position I'm in, like I kind of said earlier, is like I sort of am in between the community and the consumers, because I am one of those, and because I started as one of those, and I'm in between the publishers, because I have friends that are publishers, and I work with publishers, and I enjoy watching their games get developed and them go to Kickstarter. And it's very hard for a publisher to come out on their own and have this conversation. And I've seen that I've done 2 videos on the shipping crisis so far on the channel. And each video has been shared maybe close to a dozen times by publishers in their Kickstarter updates, as a way to be like, hey, we don't know how to talk about this, but here's someone who can. And so I really appreciate you being willing and kind of suggesting having this conversation, because I think a lot of people need more information. And I think a lot of publishers don't know how to talk about this. So
hopefully it's just added a bit of transparency to the thing, because as you say, this is going to certainly, like, the most powerful reaction we've ever had from the communities has been this fact that just telling people what's going on is really valuable. And so if we can help shed some light on this, especially with some of the weird surprising stuff, like the fact that there's no contracts in shipping, like that's what weird, what you would not expect that if you were just from the outside. You'd think it's always tightened down, ratcheted down, everything's really should be able to be predictable, and it's just this very hazy miasma that you're trying to wade through as a small publisher. And so hopefully that sort of helps shed some light on it for everyone.
Cool.
Cheers, man.
Well, give me your game, damn it.
coming. It's coming. That's coming up. If I can't get it on the show, I'm going to carry on my arm.
Right? I should just that one person that's commenting down below in the first 3 minutes of the video, like, I don't care about the conversation, just get me the game. I went Kentucky there. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for being here. I can't wait to see what else you all create, and I can't wait to play through Oathsworn.